As many of you know, Lou and I come to you in the Salt Lake Valley from the Arizona borderlands. Our home is in the desert land between Tucson and Nogales, about 30 minutes from the Mexican border. We who live and have lived on that land are familiar with the tragedy that crosses those borderlands each day, mostly each night. What you always find when you walk in the desert is something called basura. Basura is a Spanish word for trash, and that is the word that they have given all of these things that are left in the desert. Mostly they are left because when the Border Patrol picks up people they find in the desert, they do not allow them to take anything with them. So they must leave their backpacks. As you can imagine, as you have seen on television, there are lots of different ideas about what to do about the border situation. And that is not what I am here to say to you. In fact, probably in this room there are many ideas about what would be the right thing to do in the border, at the border. Near us, there is a group that gathers called the Minutemen. Have you heard of the Minutemen? One time when Lou and I were on our way home, because we did not wait for them, we did not wave at them. They're vigilantes who patrol the border with heavy-duty guns, etc. And we didn't wave at them, so they called the Border Patrol and said we looked suspicious. So the Border Patrol followed Lou and me all the way home. One man we know whose political ideas is aligned with the Minutemen always wrote letters to the editor that were very, very angry about everything that was happening on the border. And one day this man wrote an unusual letter. As this man had been driving his truck into the desert, he found a backpack. And in that backpack, he found a pair of dancing shoes. And for some reason, these dancing shoes changed his whole idea of who was crossing the desert. All of a sudden, these dancing shoes reminded him of shoes his granddaughter might have worn. And he wondered who had been crossing the desert, who had worn those shoes. Today, I place shoes like those shoes on the altar. And I try again to light the chalice, which we must light over and over again. Because often there is not enough oil. But I light this candle, I put these shoes for us to remember that our ancestors were immigrants. Our ancestors made the dangerous crossings across the ocean, wondering what they would find. And I ask that we pray in this room for compassionate legislation, and also to let you know that this food that we are gathering, that will go to the Crossroads Urban Center, is a place that serves people who are struggling to make their way among us. I need one more arm. I am not a multitasker. And the shoes was adding one too many things. Since my first sermon in this place in August, I have brought to you the story of an ancestor whose name I bear, my great-grandmother's grandmother, Patty, who pioneered into this place in 1847. But today I'm not going to talk about her. I'm going to talk about a woman who she knew in Maine, a woman named Molly Aucott, who was given the French name of Marie Agathe, but nobody could pronounce it, so it became Molly Aucott. She is a Wabanaki Indian of the Wabanaki tribe, and her name, her Wabanaki name, translates as dancing bird, which I love. So this is a story of dancing bird. And in this story, I want to remind us that through that, underneath that pioneer narrative is another narrative. That in that narrative of making a great nation, which is a wonderful narrative, there is another narrative of genocide. This story of Dancing Bird, I will tell in her voice. My cousin was going to be married, so we were invited to travel up from our home to the place called Odanak, where there is a beautiful church, the St. Francis Church. As we got on our way, and my mother and I would wait every night after we had walked so that we could make moccasins for the new bride, for my cousin. Every time we make this journey, it becomes more difficult because there are more fences in the way. And this time things are even more difficult because, you see, the English sometimes occupy this land and sometimes the French. And when the French occupied this land, we made friends with them, hoping that it would be a good thing. But now the English are gaining force on this land. We are thinking this thing as we walk north. When we reached the place, or right before the place, my mother said, "Dancing Bird, can you hear the singing?" I couldn't hear the singing. She could, but I think it was her memory. We had gone to so many wedding feasts. And through the wedding feast, from morning till night, there is singing. And as we came closer, we could see the wedding pole, and it was tied with the colors of our tribe and the colors of the new groom's family as well. And we put our beautiful moccasins at the foot of that place with the other gifts. I began looking around at my cousins, the distant cousins, wondering who would be my husband in the future. And we danced and sang, and then I couldn't be in that hot place anymore. So I went up and I sat at a hill, and it was sunset, and it began to get colder and colder, and I wrapped a blanket around me against the cold. And then I saw a person I do not know come, and he pointed at the place where my parents and my whole family was dancing. And then the English soldiers came, and all I could hear was the singing and then the screaming. Oh, if only I had had my parents come out with me. And in the morning, there was only the charred building. They had set the building on fire. My parents, my whole family was killed in that fire. And 2 weeks later, the monk who helps us from the Church of St. Francis, he came to me and he said, "We will bury the dead." And they took all the dead, but they could not recognize one from the other. They took all the dead and buried them in a mass grave. And sometimes when I bear a child, I take that child above the grave and I say, "Here is your grandson. Mother and father, here is your grandson." But I hear no answer. It is hard because these men who killed my parents, they are the Rangers. They have become famous in our land for killing my people. Liz marvelously provided shoes. These are not moose hide. Molly Aka, Dancing Bird, was famous for her embroidery. She would dip moose hairs in different colors, and you will find shoes and purses made by Dancing Bird in historical societies in Maine. These candles are also lit for what is within our reach to do. For years, this congregation has been involved in the Adopt a Native Elder program. Their mission is this: to create a bridge of hope between Native Americans and other cultures. It allows us, they say, to reach out to one another, share our gifts, and mend the broken circle of our relationship with the land and the Native Americans who hold it in sacred trust. I invite you after this service to find out more about this program that does something towards healing the problems that are just beneath the surface of this land. Now, I'm going to introduce you to even more difficult shoes. And I ask you, has anyone ever offended you? Where you have thought, "Oh, this is so unfair, and everyone thinks they're so nice." I'm hearing some. I want you to think about, to conjure in your mind, a person who has brought you grief. A few years ago, when we were in Japan, and there were it sounds so romantic in a way, living in a foreign country, but there were so many misunderstandings. And I offended lots of people, and lots of people offended me. And there was one person in particular who offended me a lot. And of course, everyone thought she was a very nice person. But this person, for some reason, and I think there are some people who catch hold of our minds, and so when we're sitting in a quiet place, that person and what they did to you comes up in your mind. And that was what happened to me. And at one point, I went to this wonderful lecture by a marvelous, wise person who is a yoga practitioner. And after he finished his wonderful presentation, he said, "Are there any questions?" And my heart started beating fast, as it does when you know that you really have a question. And I raised my hand and I said, "What do I do with these bad feelings that keep coming up about a particular person?" I try to meditate, and they go away for a while, but then I'll just be sitting quietly and they come up again. He said to me, he said, "Think about doing this. Imagine that person in your mind. Walk over to where they are and stand in their shoes," not step on their feet, that would have been easier, but stand in their shoes, and then look back at yourself. Look back at who you are. And as everybody went home, and I sat in my chair trying to do this, and I'd get right up to her, and then I'd try to put her shoes on. And that was so hard. And then finally I'd get her shoes on, and I looked over at maybe what she was seeing when she looked at me. And for some reason, my difficulty with this problem did not end. It wasn't this magical moment where I never thought of this person again. But it broke that cycle of hanging on to things that were a burden to me, of bad feelings that were troubling me, that I was carrying with me. Whose shoes do you have trouble imagining putting on? I'm going to ring this bell, and I want you to think about the person's shoes you have trouble putting on. And to begin this practice, I want you just to imagine for the next couple of minutes that you put on those shoes and look back at yourself. To remember all those people whose offensive behavior we need to let go. I will put these shoes, which I think that friend of mine would have liked, on the altar. So, why am I doing this on our We Need to Stand on the Side of Love Day? Why is this important? I think we would all like to grab placards and run to the Capitol and put bumper stickers on our car and go straight for making a difference in the world. And I am asking you to think about who is near you in your life first. Today, as we pledge ourselves to stand on the side of love, we must feel in our bones the practice of love. And it is hard work. And if it's so hard, why don't we just jump over it and get to the fun part? We can't do that because love is the transformative power within action. Love is what made Montgomery bus boycott a success. Mahatma Gandhi's loving work with the people who his group oppressed was what shook off the rule of the British. The Dalai Lama, he has so much support in this land. I think he could probably convince a president to go in there and try to clear those Chinese out of Tibet. But the Dalai Lama wakes up each morning, and I believe, and some of you may know better than I am, but in the tape I listened to, he practices 4 hours of meditation on compassion. He tells us to forgive and to love. He knows that that is the only road to peace, that the road that we might imagine, that quick road that would wipe everybody out, is not the road to the place where he wants to go. Archbishop Desmond Tutu could have held such resentment and hatred from his life under apartheid, yet he led a commission in which people told the truth with intention of reconciliation and forgiveness. And through their practices of reconciliation, forgiveness, and love, they transformed South Africa. I believe that our lives are fertile ground for a practice of loving kindness. When we are standing in the express grocery line and the person in front of us has way more than 10 items, this is an opportunity to practice being in their shoes. I wonder what it is that got them to be in that place. When someone cuts you off on the freeway, when someone close to you does something that drives you crazy, I invite you to take a deep breath and imagine being in their shoes. This practice is at the heart of all worthy social action. This practice of loving kindness will provide the foundation of the work that comes out of our mission here in South Valley. It will spread from us to the school systems so that they can welcome young men like David Fung. This practice will also make us as a community, as individuals, happier and more full of life. Let us change the world with our love, because that is the only way to change the world. May it be so. Amen.